Let's. I just want to spend some time with you this morning and kind of talk, even all on the record, but somewhat informally, about human sex trafficking, because it's an issue. It's been a local issue in some of the media sources. It's a state issue, and to some degree, it's on the national radar. So I wanted to kind of spend a few minutes and talk mainly about some definitional things, and I've given you a handout with what we're using as the current definitions, some local statistics regarding what we're seeing as far as Wichita, Sedgwick County kinds of numbers, and then talk about the difficulty with the investigations, and then some local proactive measures that we've already started looking at. First of all, just quickly, the definitions that are in front of you, there's two things. Domestic minor sex trafficking, you'll see it as an acronym a lot, DMST, in some of the national publications. That's mostly what we think of when we think of trafficking. But when we say the word trafficking, we assume that kids are being moved from point A to point B, from state to state, or even country to country, and that, by this definition, is not necessarily true. It's any time, basically, that a child is prostituted for money, and that can happen in a local jurisdiction, exclusively in a local jurisdiction. It doesn't need to be across state lines or even jurisdictional lines. Then there's commercial sexual exploitation of children, CSEC, defined a little bit differently, and that includes some more of the pornography elements, photography, manufacturing, trading, and selling of pictures and videos. Locally in Wichita, we are at a concerned level. We're not panicking about it, but we have seen a steady increase in numbers, and I've provided numbers that our EMCU unit has investigated since 2006, and you can see that year to date so far through the middle of September we're up to 28 cases, which is already 6 more cases than we had all of last year. So I've talked with staff, and the typical WPD Sedgwick County case that we are looking at is our local girls, many times runaways or many times victims of other kinds of abuse, getting involved with some type of male, a pimp, who is exploiting them by prostituting them for money, and it happens all locally. These kids aren't being trucked in from Houston or Memphis. There are local girls getting involved with the wrong kind of element, prostituting here locally, and we police somehow stumble upon this or discover this kind of offense. That's the vast majority of our trafficking cases. Now we do have out-of-state girls brought here, and some of our girls are taken out of state. Those are rare when you look at the whole numbers, though. And we even had a case earlier this year where a mother was trafficking her daughter down here from the Kansas City area and allowing her to have sex with someone. So we have all kinds of cases, but by and large, these are local cases, local flavor cases, where our local girls are involved. We ask ourselves the question anytime we see any kind of crime increase: what's going on? What's the deal? In this instance, and we're still investigating, but it seems like I think we can speak fairly confidently about 4 reasons why these numbers are up. Number one is the whole phenomena of the internet, the ease of connection between juvenile girls and predators is out there. It's unfortunate. It's on a global scale, and law enforcement and prosecution is in a catch-up mode of trying to get a handle on that. It's out there, and it's just so easy for people to connect socially, even for illicit purposes, and this kind of crime. There is an increased demand for this kind of service. I don't know why in our society that adult males crave 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, but there seems to be almost unlimited demand out there. And if there's demand, there's going to be supply. So there's pressure, and it's very easy for pimps to make money with this if they have this kind of, and I hate to call them products, but that's what they create, push these young girls into. So there's a tremendous demand out there. 2 of the reasons are maybe you could look at in a positive light. I think we're seeing some increased reporting because of some things that the media is doing. We're educating citizens, we're educating young girls on what the phenomena of this trafficking is all about. And maybe a case 10 or 15 years ago, which would have been looked at as a prostitution case solely, or a miscellaneous report involving a young girl or a runaway, is now being classified as a trafficking case. So we're increasing our public awareness, and we as law enforcement are getting better at discovering these and prosecuting them appropriately. So those are the reasons we think initially that we're seeing this spike in this type of crime. These cases are difficult to investigate for four main reasons. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, the girls involved in these cases are uncooperative. They do not see themselves as victims. They feel like what they are doing, the choices of their actions are of their own volition. They often have a boyfriend type of relationship with this individual who is exploiting them. And so they do not want to talk to law enforcement. And if they don't talk to us and we can't get a statement, it's difficult to charge and prove. We have a lack of evidence in these cases, physical evidence and witness evidence, because a lot of this takes place in a clandestine kind of environment, and kids don't want to talk or inform about other kids. So we have evidence problems. There are jurisdictional problems a lot of times. If we do have interstate or inter-city, inter-county travel, local law enforcement has to bear the brunt of these investigations. There is not a federal investigative body that looks at sex trafficking or crimes against children. That falls on the local, county, and city jurisdictions. And right now, we have a real lack of data regarding this crime. Despite what some people are putting out, where Wichita is the top 5 city, or we are higher than average, we can't prove that. There is no firm data to show that that is true. In fact, we have done a lot of research in the last 2 or 3 months at a local and a national level, and we're having a hard time getting good data on these numbers. So that's one of the things that we want to do as a proactive measure, is begin to gather good solid data on what's going on, not just in our city and county, but in the region and across the country. From a local perspective, we've seen enough of an increase in these crimes, and we know it's out there, that we want to take proactive measures, and I just want to quickly summarize for you what we're doing. First of all, we have an extremely professional exploited missing children unit that's been in place in this county since the early 1990s, and they are on top of this. They are leading the way on these investigations, and we've been compared to other units across the country, and our exploited missing unit is above most cities. So we're on top of that. We have a good investigative body, a multi-jurisdictional body already in place. The second thing we're doing is we are trying to educate ourselves as fast as we possibly can. We've attended conferences across the country. We've looked at what other cities are doing, and we're going to continue to do that to educate ourselves on this phenomena that seems to be increasing. We're going to get into some academic study. We were recently selected by Northeastern University Institute of Race and Justice to be the mid-level city to study this phenomena. They were actually on site a few months ago, spent a lot of time with our detectives and investigators in EMCU, and will give us data back from across the country after their study is complete. So we're going to take an academic look at this issue as well. We share information religiously across jurisdictional boundaries. Lieutenant Weibel and Captain Allred just went back to a conference on the East Coast. We have a good working relationship with the National Center of Exploited Missing Children, which is in Alexandria. They've come back and helped us on some of our missing child cases and are going to be involved with us on the issue of trafficking as well. We're beginning to understand better the nexus of abuses, runaways. That's the diagram I handed you out, all which lead and can increase the amount of trafficking which goes on with your young girls. Gary Riebensdorf, who's our Director of Law, is reviewing local ordinances on anything we can do to change our local city ordinances to combat this. And I'll give you an example. We have escort services in this community. We don't think anyone under the age of 21 should be anywhere remotely in or around escort services. So we're going to look at an ordinance change on something of that level to try to keep young girls away from that kind of environment. We continue to aggressively charge cases. We'll use state court. The United States Attorney Barry Grissom is extremely interested in charging trafficking crimes, and so is the Attorney General of this state. So we will charge in whatever jurisdiction, in whatever court we think will get the most punitive damage on the suspect as we can possibly do. We're looking at the possibility of joining a regional task force with Kansas City and some of the other local large jurisdictions so we have a nexus of interjurisdictional ability to investigate. And we're going to, this is getting back to grassroots, we're going to continue education of our citizens, and that's part of the reason I'm here today. And we want to continue the education to our young girls through our SRO program in middle and high schools to avoid this kind of lifestyle. So those are just kind of a sampling of the things that we are looking at to address this particular issue. So with that said, I'd be glad to answer any questions or anything you guys want to talk about regarding this issue.
Have any of these cases that in the last couple of years resulted in any deaths?
Not in the last couple of years that I can remember. Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, but I don't think so. No, these are basically our trafficking local cases, as I mentioned, basically local prostitution. The difference being the prostitute is 12 or 13, 14 years old.
Do the pimps cycle in from out of town, or are they local residents?
They're mostly local, but they can cycle in. Sometimes you'll get, and we've had cases, just another thing we discovered when we did the RICO case back in 06, 07, it's a money maker, so gang groups are automatically interested in it. It's an illicit way to make money, and we touched some of those kinds of groups when we did RICO. Local gang members getting local runaways, and they were doing some transport out of state, and that works both ways. So Houston girls and Houston pimps and Houston gang members traffic their girls all over the Midwest as well. So we've seen some of that. It's not the general rule, though, not so far, and of course we don't want it to be either. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the evolution and the way of the thinking towards prostitutes as being victims of crimes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and particularly with child prostitutes. Law enforcement has changed its attitude on prostitution with the advent of community policing in the 1990s. When we were even tackling the concept of adult prostitution, particularly on the South Broadway corridor, one of the groups that we talked to determine how to solve that problem was prostitutes themselves, and it became quite evident to us that they are in a lot of degree victims of a crime. But again, the same issues. They don't see themselves as victims, they don't recognize themselves as victims, and so you almost have to fight a battle with them to show them that that the lifestyle they're leading and what they've been forced into is making them a victim. You can multiply that tenfold with children. The same kind of way. It didn't take us very long, and I think anybody of any reasonable nature understands that it is not normal social behavior for a 12-year-old girl to have sex with a 45-year-old man for a $100 bill. So that's a much easier jump for law enforcement and for the general public to understand that kind of crime is not acceptable in our society. So now we have to convince young 12 and 13, 14-year-old girls that are hooking up with these guys on internet or Facebook, Craigslist, or any other number of free social media access points that it's not safe and it's not mature and it's not cool to get involved in that kind of stuff, and that's an uphill battle, and it's just something that's outside of the law enforcement realm. That's a parent issue, guardian issue, or whoever's a mentor for these, and I say young girls, there are some young boys involved in this too, but by and large, the sex trafficking trade is young girls. So.
Given the age of some of the people we're talking about in this, did that make it more difficult to do sting or undercover work on something like this?
Yeah, that's difficult for a couple of reasons. Now, on the internet, we can be anybody we want, and we have law enforcement that monitor internet frequently. I have a couple of detectives that are very adept at being 12 years old on an internet. But real life stings, physical stings, meat stings, difficult. We're not ever going to put a 12-year-old in jeopardy to run some kind of sting. We have to do the best we can with what we have. And plus, that group, I call them a clandestine group. This group of runaways, they're not real forthcoming with police. They don't want to talk to us. They don't necessarily want to go home a lot of times because they're avoiding abuse or some other kind of situation in a family. So it's an uphill battle for law enforcement, and it's very difficult to do any kind of proactive undercover sting work, although we're definitely going to be thinking outside the box on that in the future.
How do our numbers here that you cited compare? You talked a little bit about other cities, but how do our numbers compare to other cities our size?
That's a great question, too. We're trying to determine that. You call other jurisdictions and you try to get numbers, and they're in the same stage that we are. We're just now defining this, and we're beginning to data mine this. So I can't tell you where we're at in Wichita. I think for the size of our city, we're average. I think we have a good number of cases, enough that we're concerned about it. We were talking before this meeting. One case of a 12-year-old who is a runaway getting absorbed in this kind of lifestyle is too many cases. So we've got several here that we need to be concerned with. But I don't think that we're any better or any worse than Dallas or Los Angeles or St. Louis on a relative term as far as population, that we're yielding any more of these cases. I've seen no evidence of that, and I've looked hard for the last couple of months. Now, it is true we're on an I-35 corridor, and we've got some highways running through this city, and you're talking about trafficking of anything, drugs or money or even legal goods. That's an advantage for a city. So I think we are on a network there, and our detectives have said that before, and I think that's of a concern. But I don't want to create a hysteria in this city that our little girls are getting poached off of street corners right now, because that is not happening. It's rare, and it's something any parent should be concerned with, and we always want to have good safety for our kids. All of us do. But we are not seeing data or numbers to indicate that this city is unsafe for children any more than any other city across this land. It's always great to be careful, but I don't want to create a situation here where we have hysteria based on bad numbers or bad data.
I was going to ask, you mentioned runaways, and I'm sure there are parents out there who live in fear that their little girl may get kidnapped or grabbed off a street corner, like you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Have there been any cases like that involve any of these or any other cases?
There's cases, Stan. There's cases historically that we look at. We have about 1,200 to 1,400 runaways in this city, and unfortunately that's a very stable number that we investigate every year. And we've had cases historically in the past where young girls have been, they'll come into contact with this kind of element, the pimp or the male who wants to exploit them, and they'll get snatched, and they'll get trained, and they'll get moved, and they'll serve as a sex slave in another city. It happens, and we have documented cases of that in this city. So, but they're extremely rare when compared with the larger scale of numbers. Now, should parents be concerned with that? Absolutely. Should they talk to their children about this kind of life? Absolutely. And should we be concerned for our runaway kids? Yes, because we're showing a direct connection, and that's going on nationally. There's a direct connection between runaway girls and this industry. So we have to be very cognizant of our runaway numbers and how we treat our runaways, to the point even when we bring our runaways back home now, when we find them, we want to talk to them about what they've seen and done and experienced. And we used to never do that. We just take them home and say, that's the end of this case, until they ran away the next time. But now we ask them on the way back home, where have you been, who have you had contact with, and what's going on out there? And we try to gather intelligence and data that way so that we can better combat this.
You said it's been hard to track down firm numbers. Is this on a national level as well?
Yeah.
I'm curious about how much this is increasing nationally, not just locally.
I think it is increasing nationally for the exact same reasons that I brought up why it's increasing locally. First of all, as law enforcement and prosecution, we are further defining this and changing the mindset of how we investigated these from a decade or two ago. So that's happening across the board. The internet is worldwide, so I'm sure that this connectivity between potential victims and suspects happening in Germany and Russia and Japan and the United States. So, and I think we're getting better educated. I think the media is better educated. I think that trickles down to the public. They're better educated, and hopefully, and I don't think we should be shocked if we see an increase in reporting. I think we want an increase in reporting to some degree, because I'd rather have an increase in reporting than somebody not reporting a crime that's insidious, that's going on behind the scenes. So we hope within the next generation here, we'll get some good data on this. But right now, we cannot find it. It doesn't exist.
Do you also find when, in your comment about the girls being uncooperative, is it also that they're in fear of prosecution?
We're talking 12, 13, 14-year-old girls here now. If you ever raised one, been around one, had a niece, they got a lot of things going through their mind. And I'm absolutely convinced you're right on spot there, to where they think, as they fear us as law enforcement, they fear the uniform, and they think our goal is to try to prosecute. And historically, maybe it has been to some degree. 20 years ago, when we ran into a 13, 14-year-old who was a runaway, handcuffed, taken down to a juvenile detention facility, returned back home, a home that they may not want to go to because of other abuse reasons. So absolutely, I think they fear that. And it takes convincing from the line level officers and from these investigators to talk with girls about the fact that they are a victim. And it's difficult, it's challenging. We're going to continue to work on this. Lieutenant Weibel is going to be our point man as far as these investigations and any legal changes that come about because of this. So if you ever have more technical questions or more data questions, he'll go ahead and contact him. But I will tell you right now, the data available is, unfortunately, I have to say, it's poor. So, yes, sir.
Reference the data, I was going to tell Stan there's a couple of more recent studies, and I can forward those to you. But it doesn't give any statistical numbers by state. And then there's also the Polaris project that does grade states based on how proactive the states are.
And we'll just shoot that to you. That's on the system. We'll shoot that to you through, let's do that through Nolte.
Yes,
and then you can have that too. But again, and particularly on the Polaris project, don't misread that. That shows you how aggressive a law enforcement entity is being in combating this. It doesn't show you victimization rates or the, because honestly, in the city of Wichita, and I've said this time and time again, this has been one of our top 3 concerns investigatively in this city is the safety of our kids. And it's not just trafficking, it's pornography, it's abuse, and we will do everything we possibly can, and I guarantee you that Nola Fulston's office will too, and so will Barry Grissom's. We will do everything we can legally to make sure that our children are safe in this community. Up to, I'm assuring you right now, we're going to add staffing to our exploited missing children unit next year. We're going to do it one way or another. And if there's budget cuts and we have to cut X amount of police officers or detectives, and I don't know that yet, but if there is, we're going to figure out a way to more heavily staff that area, because these are critical investigations involving pretty vulnerable people.